Hello, everyone. We will begin shortly. In the meantime, please introduce yourselves in chat, saying your name and where you're joining us from today. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone. Welcome to another CMS in Touch event. And this one is very special indeed. It's one of our standalone events. We've been doing a lot of special series recently, but this is one of those rare occasions where we bring you something truly special. Not that other things are not special, but this one is. And we're going to be talking about the experiences of becoming and being an associate editor today. And it's the topic quite I'm personally quite interested in as a relatively recently joined associate editor. So I joined Management Learning editorial team in June last year. So I'm very interested in what Ilaria, Gabrielle, Kristin, and Suhaib tell us today, and the discussions that start. So I hope you enjoy the event. Just before we start, a few household points. So first of all, we've got an hour today, and it's going to be quite an interactive thing between the associate editors, and then in terms of the wider discussion. So we'll have a debate, a discussion between the associate editors, the panelists, and then we'll proceed to discussion. And in the meantime, if you have any questions, feel free to put them at any point in time under the Q&A function. So not into chat, because they might get lost there, but in the Q&A function that looks like two speech bubbles, either at the bottom or the top of your screen. So put the questions there, and Ilaria, who's going to be, so as being a panelist, also looking after Q&A today, she'll dig them out of the appropriate point and make sure that everybody sees those questions. So without further ado, I'm going to pass over to Ilaria. Welcome.
Thank you, and thank you so much for CMS in Touch for hosting us today. It is really my pleasure to join our panelists in this session, and I'll ask them to introduce themselves in a minute. The plan is to look at 4 key areas around our kind of like practice of being an associate editor and like becoming an associate editor, and I'm becoming an associate editor, perhaps, as we were discussing before the start of this session. And then we will have space for Q&A at the end. So please make sure you post your Q&As throughout the sessions in the Q&A function, and then we'll look at them towards the end of our session. So without further ado, my name is Ilaria Boncori. I'm a professor in organization behavior and human resources management at the University of Essex in the UK. And I have the pleasure of being co-editor-in-chief of Culture and Organization with Kristin. And I've had experience of being an associate editor in a small journal called .org International, and then being on the editorial review boards for other journals like Organizations or Gender Work and Organization. Gabby, do you want to go next?
Thank you for the invitation. Thank you for the kind introduction. My name is Gabrielle Durepos. I am a professor at Mount St. Vincent University in business administration. I'll tell you a little bit about my experience. I'm an associate editor of Journal of Management History, Brazilian Administration Review, Qualitative Research in Organizations and Management, Canadian Journal of Administrative Science, and Management Learning. I'm also an editor for a book series, Debates in Business History. It's a Palgrave book series. And I am a past editor at the Academy of Management Learning and Education, where I finished my term in 2020, but I actually finished my term 2 years later because that's the amount of volume you get at AMLE. I've co-edited 6 special issues, and I'm also an editorial board member at 5 journals. So I was the one who was talking about unbecoming the associate editor. That's a lot of associate editing. That's me.
Thank you. Suhaib, do you want to go next?
Thank you. I'm Suhaib Riaz. I'm a professor, associate professor at the Telfer School of Management at the University of Ottawa in Canada. And just some relevant experience for this session. I serve as a section editor at the Journal of Business Ethics in the section Global Issues. I also serve as an associate editor in the journal Organization. And several years ago, I edited a special issue on economic inequality at the journal Human Relations. So yeah, that's it for me. Thank you.
Thank you. And Kristin?
Hi, I'm Kristin Williams. I'm an associate professor in management, and I'm the director, pardon me, of the FC Manning School of Business here at Acadia University on the East Coast of Canada. As Ilaria said, I have the pleasure of co-editing with her at Culture and Organization. I'm also on the editorial advisory board of the Journal of Management History, and I'm an associate editor at Qualitative Research in Organizations and Management, and I've edited books and special issues as well. It's a delight to be here this morning. Thank you.
Thank you all. And we have 4 topics that we would like to explore in a little bit more depth. The first one is about becoming an associate editor. So some of you might be already associate editors, some of you might be associate editors in small journals and looking at going into bigger journals. So we'll explore some of the issues there. The second topic is around dealing with reviewers, which is always a very strong issue in being an associate editor. The third part of our talk today is about making decisions, because that's a key part of being an associate editor. And then the final point is, what does an enabling associate editor look like? So, we don't want to say a good associate editor, because that's a bit loaded perhaps, but what does it mean to be an enabling associate editor for authors, for the journal, for reviewers, and so on? So I'll kick off with becoming an associate editor. And I remember being an early career scholar thinking, but how do you become an associate editor? And I have to say, about 15 years ago, it was a lot more, I think the praxis around being known in the community and people inviting you to become an associate editor. And I'm really pleased that nowadays there are more and more calls for associate editors online. So if you're interested in becoming an associate editor, please look online. The journals very often on their website have calls for associate editors, as well as like members of the review board, for example. Kristin and I have recently gone through another round of recruitment for associate editors. And I think what's really important when you apply for, that position is to think, what do I bring to this particular specific journal? So it's really important to be looking at a journal that you read, that you're familiar with, that hopefully you've published in. So you're familiar with the conversations, with the style, with the methods. So it's really important that you write a targeted application, but also think, what other experience do I bring? What other skills or transferable skills? So for example, the panelists have talked about other editorial work, whether it's for book series or special issues. And special issues, I think, are really a good introduction to editing, because it's, a limited number of papers, but it's a very similar process to what you would go through for, editing papers in general issues. And very often associate editors also support special issues that are guest edited by colleagues outside of the journal. So you can also think about, your work as a reviewer, how you've contributed to the journal specifically as a reviewer or as an author. If the journal is associated with a conference, for example, have you you've been participating in the conference? Have you organized streams or tracks? And very often special issues come from streams and tracks in in conferences. So, you know, when you're thinking about becoming an associate editor, I know sometimes you think, oh, that's probably good for my promotion application or my CV. But if you think about it, like in terms of what you bring, what the benefits are for the community and the journal, I think that helps quite a lot. And I think looking at, for example, sometimes, you know, if you are rejected, it might not be because of you, but it might be because of the existing pool of associate editors. So very often the editors look for complementary skills or knowledge to what is already existing in the associate editor board, or for example, a mix of people from different backgrounds, different geographical areas. So, you know, look at that in terms of like how you would fit in, and kind of like the experience that you bring in. But also, is there anyone on the board that you could buddy up with? You know, so for example, if you have never been an associate editor before, is there anyone there who could be a bit of a mentoring figure to you that can help you through the system? I don't know if colleagues have other thoughts about becoming an associate editor. No?
You covered all my points, Ilaria. Well done.
If I can add just one comment, there's I think for me, there's a element of serendipity. It's luck. So some of the jobs I kind of fell into, some colleagues said, "Hey, Gabby, you know, you might be good at this thing." And then, like, I have to say, Bill Foster, who was the editor-in-chief at AMLE, really showed me how to review a paper, and he showed me how to be an associate editor. So I was just lucky to find this person. So I think there's an element of serendipity that goes into the equation.
Thank you. I think that's really important. And it's also really important for the community that people who are more experienced, for example, as editors, you know, show the ropes. Or like, for example, in Culture and Organization, Kristin and I have kind of like earmarked some of the editorial roles for more early career scholars or less experienced editors, so that they could almost like shadow the other associate editors. So for example, you know, like social media editor or media editor, or a section editor, like a book editor, for example, then has more of kind of like a, you know, like a smaller scope rather than being a general associate editor. And also I think there is a lot of support that as you know, editor-in-chief or more experienced associate editors can give. And I think in terms of becoming an associate editor, as an author and as a reviewer, you are probably familiar with most of the systems that host the editing. So even though you might have a different system, many of the big journals use ScholarOne, for example. So, you know, the submission process and how you interact with the system is probably similar across journals, but there are also training, you know, materials that can be developed, and Kristin has developed some in the past. So I think it's also really important to not feel isolated and to reach out to people, because at the beginning, I remember in my first associate editor position, I was just kind of like thrown into the deep end and given papers, and I was a bit scared, and I wasn't confident enough to reach out to the editors or others for support. So it was a bit of a like steep learning curve. But I think, you know, it's really important to seek that support and that community. Yeah.
Yeah, I just wanted to add to, sorry, Kristin, go ahead. I'll
No,
jump in after
you go. No, oh, okay, thank you. I was just going to say that if I had to check 3 boxes before I felt ready to be an associate editor, reviewing and publishing in that specific journal, absolutely. But what's really lovely about doing a special issue in that journal is that you can have embedded mentorship in the experience of doing the special issue. So you can work with more senior scholars, and you can become more comfortable both with the technical systems and the decision-making and the finding the reviewer piece. So it's almost like taking a course in associate editor work. So I'm a huge proponent of that path. And I think it's really also a great way to get closer to an understanding of how the journal makes decisions in terms of its objects and aims and scope. Thank you.
Thank
Yeah,
you.
I would just add that spend some time talking to people at the journal leadership, and if you can, in person. I think that can be very helpful. Each journal has its own idiosyncrasies in terms of the labels. What does a section editor mean? For example, at Journal of Business Ethics, it's not a small role, it's a massive role because the entire journal is split up into sections. So you have to understand those. Also, journals have various types of submissions. The journal organization, for example, is very creative in terms of the types of submissions you can have. So you want to understand that with journal leadership, sit down and understand what kinds of submissions will you be handling and what are the differences involved in those, right? Some are shorter pieces, and we see this now increasingly across journals that there are shorter activist type, essay type pieces coming in. So they may have very different requirements in terms of what an editor is supposed to do. So you want to have that conversation with the journal leadership. That would be my suggestion. Yeah.
I think that's a really excellent point. And also, as you mentioned, in some journal sections are huge. It's like a journal that's a small journal somewhere else. So I think, it's also sometimes useful to start with a smaller journal, for example, to kind of like find your feet, but not necessarily. I think it's also really important that that you really understand the journal and the ethos of the journal. And, they're all similar on a macro level, but they're all actually slightly different in how they work in the relationship with the authors or with the editor-in-chief, or how they manage the process. Gabby, yes.
I'll just add on to that. So just 2 points I want to make. One of the questions that's important to ask the editor-in-chief when you come on as an associate editor is the process that the editors-in-chief or the managing editor follows to assign papers. So for example, at Management Learning, the 2 EICs, editors-in-chief, use a round-robin approach. So they get a paper in, there's an initial screening, and the managing editor assigns a paper to one associate editor, and then another one gets one. Everyone takes a turn, and then we start up again. So everyone gets, the papers are assigned. But for example, at Canadian Journal of Association, at CJAS, Canadian Journal of Administrative Science, it's a sectional. So for example, there I'm in charge of organizational theory. So I get all the I get the org theory papers. Some other journals will assign by topic. Like for example, when I was working at Academy of Management Learning and Education, I got a lot of the critical management studies papers, but I didn't deal with the entrepreneurship papers at all. It's not my area. So this is important because some of us are naturally comfortable in certain areas more than others. So for example, at CJAS, CJAS gets positivist papers, empirical papers, and post-positivist papers. And so as the org theory person, I'm getting all kinds of papers, and some of them I'm not especially comfortable with. And I'm sort of questioning, like, is that a good use of your time? Not just for me, but I'm not doing a service to the authors because I'm not guiding them. I think doesn't necessarily work to my my area of comfort. I would say expertise, but that's putting it a bit too exaggerating. So round robin, by section, by topic, I think it's important to ask those questions. Oh,
Yeah.
sorry, there's a second point, and I'll be quick. The second point is the journals are living organisms. So to a point previously made, when the editorship of the journal changes, the editorship mobilizes the ethos and the remit of the journal differently. It's the same remit, it's the same tagline, the journal has the same focus, but the way that one editorial team mobilizes that focus is completely different. So they're organisms that change with time. Some editors-in-chief, some journals like Academy of Management Learning Education, when a new EIC comes in, they choose their whole team. The whole team starts and ends with the EIC, But other journals like Management Learning, for example, the EICs have an overlap mandate, and they choose, so every associate editor comes in and they have a 5-year term, and you will overlap with different editors-in-chief, which means you have to be flexible because they will mobilize the ethos of the journal differently. So you're kind of, you're following the lead, but when the leader changes, you have to be like, okay, well, what does that mean for me, and how can I make sure I fulfill the vision of the journal as they're enacting it? That was my last point.
Thank you. And before we move on to the second point of our agenda, just something else to think about. So there are, small journals that get, 100 submissions a year. And then there are bigger journals that get 150 submissions a month. So I think something else to think about is your capacity, because I think it's really important for editorial processes to be, effective and on time. So as an editorial like board member or like associate editor, how much capacity do you have? How many papers can you support? And obviously a paper can have different, rounds of reviews and need different levels of support. So I think it's really important to discuss that with the editorial team as well as you apply. Gabby, do you want to talk us through like dealing with reviewers next?
Yeah, so I want to start by saying for the last 2 years, I'm trying really hard to listen creatively, listen critically, but also just spend more time listening. So I'm going to try to keep my stuff short, but with a name like Gabby, it's one of those things where you just gab, right? Okay, so dealing with reviewers, when I get a paper, the first thing I do is I read the references. It doesn't matter if I'm reviewing it for a research paper, I'm reviewing it, if I'm looking at that paper to assign reviewers. First thing I do is I go to the back, I read through all the references of the paper. What I then do is I look at, so for example, if I'm editing for Management Learning, I look to see how embedded the current paper is within the Management Learning literature. And the way I do that is I count how many Management Learning papers are being cited. If there's a lot of competitor journals being cited in the journal, in the paper that I'm going to assign to review, then I'm like, oh, this must have got rejected at AMLE and now they're sending it to Management Learning. So often my thought process, which is totally, totally fine. But one of the things I try to do is to assign reviewers, I think about the literature that this author should have been citing, and I go to those people for the review. If a paper should be citing, I don't know, in a paper in Management Learning should be citing Anne Cunliffe, I'll go to someone who's worked with Anne, or I might go to Anne. She's very busy, obviously, but this is kind of the process I follow. I deal with, when I'm thinking about reviewers, I try and I think about getting a paper from one place to the next, allowing that paper to reach its full potential. I think about it as it's like a car ride. So I grew up in a small town, and in the small town, you know everybody, right? And so if you were driving in the winter and it's like -40 outside and you saw your friend on the side of the street, you stop the car and you're like, hey, do you want to ride? Where are you going? And then they'll say, oh, I'm going to the superstore or whatever. It's a grocery store. And then you get the person in your car and you drive them to the location that they want to go. So when I get a paper, I'm like, where does this author want to go? And I think, I need to find the reviewer that's going to let the author go to their location on their own terms. I try really hard to empower the author. And the only way you can do that is by listening to what they're trying to say. Now, obviously in our first draft, we don't always know what we're saying. So we just need some help. And so I try to find reviewers that will help the author on their own terms. And it's a bit of an art, and sometimes I fail. So that's what I do to find reviewers. And then I obviously check affiliations. And some people will say, oh, if the reviewer is at the same affiliation as where the author is located, it's a full stop. No, I'm not going to ask that reviewer. I don't do that. Sometimes I'll go to the reviewer and say, can you remain impartial? Because you could help this person a lot. And that would be really beneficial. So sometimes I do get authors who are at a similar affiliation or a similar geographical area. When the reviews come back, sometimes obviously the reviews are very different. I expect for them to be very different. I expect for split reviews. And obviously I'm going to make the decision. So sometimes I'll get a major revision. Sometimes I will get a revise, and I'll get a conditional accept. And what I often do when I start reading the paper again is I'll split the decision down the middle, but I won't talk about decision making. But it just, then I think what we have to do if we're trying to be moral or ethical associate editors is I try to give a voice to each of the reviewers as I write the decision letter. I don't believe that any review is useless. When we're trying to, when we're writing a review, we're joining a conversation. And so I try to listen to the reviewers as much as I'm trying to listen to the authors to find out where they want to go. So I I put a lot of effort in reading the review and reading the reviewer's comments and try to listen critically and think, okay, where is this person going with this? There's something here. I know they have something useful to say. And I try to really pull that out when I write the decision letter. So I really try to give them the benefit of the doubt, even when the review looks not as useful as it could be. I just want to touch quickly on late reviews. I'm a big proponent of sending a friendly reminder. If the reviewer comes to me and says, "Oh, I need 5 weeks, not 4," I'm like, "Yeah, sure, that's fine." If they're gonna take a month extra, then that's definitely an issue, and then I would find someone else. When I find reviewers, I try really hard to make sure the reviewer understands the journal mandate. If I'm associate editor on a special issue, I make sure that, especially there, the reviewer understands the journal mandate. They have a copy of the special issue proposal so they can understand, okay, we're reviewing within this context, and the deadline, because the special issues have tight deadlines. And so we definitely need to think about the timeline for the reviews. I try really hard to encourage the reviewers to write constructive reviews. I have never altered a review. At AMLE, I was taught that you can't do that. It's not your voice. So I try not to do that. Now, last thing I'll touch upon is dealing with angry reviewers or reviewers that start a fight in the review process at round 2. So angry reviewers. At one point, I had an experience where I was at Academy Management Learning Education, and one of the reviewers came back to me and said, "Gabby, you're asking the authors to do the impossible. You're wasting the reviewer time because what you've asked in your decision letter is impossible." And it just so happened that this reviewer is someone I looked up to a lot, and I felt a little, not chastised, but I felt like, oh boy, I've done something wrong. Maybe I should have done a reject, because if you push a paper through multiple rounds of reviews, you're wasting the author's time if it doesn't work out, and you're wasting the reviewer's time. Every time they wrote a review, you're wasting their time. And I just had a feeling that there was a gem in the paper. Luckily, it worked out for me. I told the authors, look, it's up to you if you want to attempt this. But it worked out. And it's funny because the reviewer came back and said, "You know what? I didn't think it was possible, but you saw something and it materialized." So I felt really good about myself, but sometimes that doesn't happen. And I think you just have to forgive yourself if you saw something and you ended up wasting the reviewer's time. Yeah, I will say the last thing, finding reviewers is hard. If you want to find good reviewers, you must review yourself. You review for people and you always say yes. Unfortunately, I'm a yes person, which is why I'm doing too much editing right now. But I review for many people because I know that if I'm looking for a good constructive review, they will say yes to my ask. But it's a community. You can't take reviews without giving. So if for any paper that you handle, as an associate editor, you should be reviewing as many as you're handling. So I'll stop there.
Thank you. I wanted to mention about reviewers, and I think that is probably the most crucial part of being an associate editor, like for me, especially if you work in a journal that lends itself or welcomes to experimental work or writing differently. If you assign the wrong reviewer, the paper doesn't stand a chance. So I think it's really hard to find reviewers lately, especially from, since the pandemic, I would say. And people are much more selective with their time, what they can take on. And sometimes, we had a paper where we had to reach out to, I think, 16 reviewers. Sometimes, what we do is look for a reviewer who is a subject or topic expert, a reviewer who is a methodology expert, and someone else like that can contribute to either. Sometimes you also need other associate editors or other colleagues to have, have another look, because you might have very contrasting reviews. I think as authors, we've all received something that is like accept, reject, the major, and so reviewers can only come from their own experience and their own point of view. And I think one thing that journals started doing a few years ago, which is really useful, is to send the reviewers the decision letter with everybody's review in there. And I think if you're a reviewer, or if you're an associate editor, please do that if you have the opportunity, because it's also a learning moment for the reviewers to look at other reviewers' feedback on a paper.
I want to speak to something technical because I think it's important. There's an algorithm that lives inside of Scholar One, and it's customizable by the journal. And so depending on where you're doing your associate editor work, it functions better or worse. And so if you are in the position where you're assigning a reviewer, there is an algorithm that will actually make suggestions. And I would say on balance, you ignore that because it's not very helpful. And it's because it typically just pulls out topics that are similar. It doesn't consider ontology, epistemology, or ways of writing. And so you need to look external to the system for your reviewers. And there's a lot of lovely little hotspots that I've found to be particularly helpful. I really like looking at conference proceedings. I think most of the time they're searchable, and most of the time you can read abstracts of what people have presented, and it gives you a good sense of whether or not they might be a good reviewer. I also look at various databases like Google Scholar or academy.edu. Those are helpful too. Sometimes a simple Google search will pull up somebody's particular interests and expertise. But I guess if there's one piece of advice I can give you is do not sort of restrict yourself to the system and really stretch out a really wide net, because otherwise you're going to have a very difficult time finding reviewers.
Yeah, I think that's very helpful. One thought I would add here is that develop your own extensive pool of reviewers. So as you're doing exactly what Kristin suggested, going outside of the system, because the system matches are sometimes not that accurate, you want to have your own document where you're, listing down, the reviewers who gave excellent reviews and maybe fit the area that you're handling. That would be one thing. The other thought would be that try to give new reviewers a chance, right? Not everybody has 1,000 and thousands and thousands of sites. So if you're looking at Google Scholar, like Kristin said, there are emerging scholars, very bright, they're very engaged. And typically, if I'm doing 3 reviewers, maybe I'll try to sometimes have one emerging reviewer. That can be interesting. Another thought back to the system, this, Kristin, your point has made me think that these systems, if they're not working so well, and this goes back to the earlier point, if you're a new associate editor coming in, being new can have its pros. So you want to actually maybe raise this with the journal leadership and say, how can we make the system a little bit better? Why are the editorial board profiles not updated? Right? For example, like there's some simple things that when you're coming in new, you look at it and you're like, we could make this better. So I would say, take charge, get involved. As opposed to, well, the system's just sending me reviewers, I'm just going to do this. And it's more of a judgment role. So I would approach the reviewer aspect that way with some initiative. Yeah.
Thank you. And do you want to talk us through making decisions and how, the role of the associate editor in guiding those decisions?
Yeah, and it relates to everything we've been hearing, because decisions come from everything that we are talking about. And I just said human judgment, and so I think when you're making decisions, you have to remember, what is our role as associate editors, right? We are going to use human judgment, and in my experience, I found that there is a range here. Sometimes you can have a very light touch, because you got very engaged reviewers who are all aligned, right? At other times, it's more complex, and you really have to get involved in more detail. And as Gabrielle, you were saying, the reviewers have voices, and these are different, very different voices. So at that point, so just taking a step back, I think it starts at the point where you're deciding who would review this. You're the only one who knows the reviewers' backgrounds here. So you have to think about this. What is the training of a particular reviewer? What kind of area of interest, or even sometimes a disciplinary background, are they coming from? Sometimes I will even ask these reviewers, this is how to make a better decision for me. Like sometimes I will say, could you please focus more on this part? I would really appreciate some views from you on this, right? And all of that, then you factor into making your decision. I think it is a lot of judgment. Some other things that can help you is you have to be more involved in the field than the typical author. So you have to read a lot. You have to be at a lot of workshops. You have to be at a lot of conferences. This is time-consuming stuff, right? It can be overwhelming stuff. You have to stay updated on methods, for example, and often on methods and other approaches from outside your immediate disciplinary area, because the advancements are sometimes happening broadly in the social sciences. So those things can help you make better decisions. Maybe one or two last tips. Go beyond the mundane in making a decision. That's what I try to do. These days it's very easy, especially let's say a quantitative paper. People do amazing quantitative work, robustness checks and all that. It's very important. You have to understand that and respect it. But you have to go beyond there's some mundane stuff going on as well, right? These are very standardized things at times. And so you have to, as an editor, go beyond that and start thinking about, well, does it really offer a contribution, right? It's not a question of, is it good enough, but is it going above and beyond? Is it making some kind of a contribution, which is not trivial, right? I'll stop there and maybe I can add more. The others may have other thoughts.
Thank you. Yes, and I think one of the things that, as an author, perhaps I didn't appreciate is that the reviewers are there to advise the editor, but the decision is the editor's decision. And someone in the questions asked something that I thought would be useful to answer now rather than at the end, is about desk rejections and what they are and what types. And in my experience, there are two types of desk rejections. And as we were saying before, sometimes these are done by the editor-in-chief. Sometimes these are done by the associate editors. It depends on how the journal works. The desk rejection is like the rejection at the very first point of decision making. So it's like after that first initial screening. And there are two reasons usually. One is the manuscript is unsound, which means it's underdeveloped or not rigorous enough, or, you know, the quality is not good enough. And then the other reason is unsuitable. So it's not the right fit for the journal. And it could be that, for example, I mean, we receive the vast majority of rejects in most journals are because it's unsuitable, because someone just looked at a list and sent like a quantitative paper to a qualitative journal, or, you know, something that doesn't engage with any of the conversations of the journal. As we were saying before, it's not just about citing the journal in the literature and in the reference list, but are you engaging with the journal and the conversations there? And so those two are the main reasons why a journal decides to desk reject. So, you know, and sometimes if it's a journal that has a huge volume of submissions, then the rejection rate is even higher, because they are looking at papers that are more developed than perhaps other journals that take a more developmental, supportive approach to, you know, to papers that are being submitted.
Yeah, I couldn't I couldn't agree more. The writing decision letters is something I put a lot of effort in. I love the craft of writing a decision letter, and I'll say there's a few reasons why. The first reason is because at one point in my career, I received a decision letter. It was from Damien O'Doherty. It was the most caring, precise, on point, articulate decision letter I've ever received. And I just remember thinking to myself, like, wow, what a craft. This person read the reviews, he internalized them, he interpreted them, and he just basically gave me on a silver platter as an author what I had to do. And it was a bit prescriptive, but it wasn't offensive. And I thought, you know, I want to be just like that. So I think one of the best ways to become a good associate editor and write good decision letters is when you get one as an author that you love, then you keep it, and you try to kind of mold yourself according to those standards that you've seen that you appreciate. And I think we can write constructive and caring decision letters while keeping an element of rigor. I've never been told once in my life, Gabby, you're sloppy. If anything, I've been told you're tough, but you know, you're fair. And so I think when I'm crafting a decision letter, I'm always looking for the gem. I know every paper, there's something that the authors put in there that's shiny, it's beautiful. And my job is I want to draw on the feedback from the reviewers, and I want to take that gem and bring it up. That's their contribution. It's the gift they're giving to, you know, the academic audience. And I want to try to find a way to surface that gem and help the authors do that. When I write the decision letter, just like some very pragmatic points, I use positive language as much as possible. So something I'll say is, if I'm giving a major revision, which involves quite a bit of work, sometimes I'll say it's up to the authors whether they want to take up this work. I'll give the authors the decision. It's a lot of work, and it's up to you whether you want to do it or not. So just saying, instead of saying this is a high risk revision and there's a high rate of failure, you know, I would never say. I just get rid of those template emails. And sometimes I say, you know, the reviewers have given you a lot of feedback, a lot to think about, and it's because they see the potential in your work. You've engaged them, you've excited them. Instead of saying the reviews are really long and you got a lot of work to do if you want to get this out, and there's a high risk of reject. Instead of saying that, I'll say, because, you know, if we're uninterested, we're not going to write a lot as reviewers. So it's when you read a paper and like, oh, this is good, you know, if they do these 5 points, and 5 points is, you know, a lot, but they could get, you know, the paper out. So I try to interpret that for the authors. Whether they believe me or not is a mystery to me. But I try to say, look, you've offered the reviewer so much that they're excited about your work. Like, let's do this. And I also think, you know, when we write papers, a lot of us write from the heart. I don't, you know, there's a lot of emphasis, I know, on getting published and you want this career. But the stuff you write, like I think of like Kristin, for example, writes, and you can tell in her work, she writes from the heart, and you can feel it. And so when you're writing that decision letter, I think what we should do is we need to tread softly, because we're gonna step on people's dreams, step on their souls. We're going to impact them at a pretty fundamental level. And so I always think of like writing to my sister or writing to my mom, and I try to write the letter with care and love. And I know that sounds super fluffy, but I just think this is going to make us a better community if we write with that ethos. So that's it.
Thank you. And looking at like being better, Kristin, do you want to talk us through how one can try to foster like an enabling approach to editing?
I'm going to try to build on some of the lovely things that Gabby said about her approach, which I think is something I've really tried to emulate. I consider Gabby a tremendous mentor, and she's taught me a lot about editing, and it's through the kind of feedback that she's provided. I really do think that the associate editor does set the tone with that correspondence with the author. So you know, you might receive some reviews that have a lot of tone in them. Maybe they're harshly written. It's up to you to really reshape that discourse and help the author understand what's needed. It is, I mean, for me, I really take it personally when I get feedback. I have to really cope with that, and it's difficult. So, you know, after I've walked around my house several times or taken a walk around the neighborhood, so help the author get to the point where they can dive back into the work and sift out the things that they need to do. That's really important. And I've really drawn on a lot of great practices to get better at that. And I am a work in progress. As recently as this week, through a colleague, Mariana, who I'm working with on a special issue, I was taking notes because she just has a tremendous way of offering feedback. So I think you're always learning and growing and always learning how to be better at what you do. It is a craft, as Gabby said. So be really thoughtful. I also want to come back to these scripts. Oh, these scripts. So Ilaria and I have we're trying to tackle these embedded scripts within Scholar One. They're actually not very easy to change. There's tens of thousands of them that are embedded in Scholar One. So you really do need to customize those emails. If you don't like the templated response, nix it. Put what you think needs to be there and communicate to your author as a person, like a real person. You know, get rid of this facade that is this machine, that is this interface between you and the author, and talk to them as a person. And this getting rid of the scripts will help you do that. You can try to help the journal improve those scripts, and Ilaria and I are trying to do it, but boy, oh boy, it's challenging. So in the absence of the system getting better, we need to make the system better by customizing it. I also think that timely communication is also kind. So Ilaria spoke about the numerous likely desk rejects because they're unfit for the journal. I think a lot of authors look at those rejection rates and they assume that all of those papers were like a perfect fit for the journal. So the 80 to 90% rejection rate is a reflection of how they're going to experience the journal. Not even close. That 80 to 90% rejection rate is related to that unsuitable, unsound piece, which means that the 10 to 20% of papers that are past the desk have met kind of the scope and aims of the journal, and the journal is interested in having that ongoing developmental discussion with you. So do not be discouraged by rejection rates. Please take them from what they are and put them into context. I think that's very, very important. I also think that there's a practice that I helped put in place at QROM, and then we instituted here at Culture and Organization, is related to how the associate editors receive assignments, which I also think is very kind. And if you're a new associate editor, I think you need to advocate for this. So I did a survey at QROM, similarly did a survey of expertise amongst the AEs, find out what methods, theories, literatures, topics, stuff they think is cool, papers they want, the kind of papers they want to engage with. If you're able to work with the papers that you feel really comfortable with, as Gabby said earlier, you're far more likely to be able to tap into a better review network. You're far more likely to be able to help that author navigate. So if you are a new AE and you can inform a new practice, and do that kind of talent matrix work, I think it's really important because it also helps the journal identify gaps in that talent matrix, which then can be used to do calls for new editors and fill in gaps that are missing. So I think that's really important. I also think it's important that if you think, if let's say a paper has gone past the desk and it's arrived and it's, you've been assigned this beautiful paper and you think it's not going to be the right paper for the journal, even though it's received a desk review by the editor, you are still the decision maker. And making a timely decision on that paper is sometimes the kindest thing to do. Allowing that author to find a different journal that's a better fit is a kind thing to do. Again, you're investing the time of yourself and reviewers, et cetera. So consider all of that when you are given an assignment. And don't assume just because an editor has desk reviewed it, that it is acceptable to put into this rigorous process of peer review. That may not be the case. A desk review can be quite cursory, in fact. So that can be something to consider. I think those are my key points. So I'll let others chime in.
Okay, I'm talking way too much here, but I'm just going to say, as an associate editor, you're going to make mistakes. The last paper I handled at the Academy of Management, Learning and Education went through 7 rounds. And one of my reviewers was like, yeah, I'm done, Gabby, see you later. I like 7 rounds. That is way too much. The paper should go maybe through 3 rounds, 4 at the most. And the journals sort of have, like at AMLE, it was like a 3 round kind of get it, it was kind of like the norm. 7 rounds. What a massive failure on my part. And I felt horrible. The paper got in the last round. I asked the author to move it from a research and reviews to an essay in round 7 as a conditional accept. It was just a monstrosity of an error. And I had to be like, okay, forgive yourself. Like, you did your best, but there was something so good in that paper. And I thought to myself, if this author had just submitted the paper to Management Learning, it would be an accept right now. But in the format, I couldn't publish it. I couldn't accept it in AMLE because it would have stuck up like a sore thumb. And yeah, I mean, I haven't quite forgiven myself, but you're just going to make mistakes. I mean, it's just the way it goes, right? It was my last paper of 112.
That's a lot of papers. And I think papers can be challenging at all stages. You can be a very experienced associate editor and you find a paper that's really challenging. You can't find the reviewers, or the reviewers you haven't quite contributed as much or been as formative, or, it still needs a bit more development. And so so I think as you say, it's not an easy process. And I think, some associate editors are more thoughtful than others, to be fair. We have 3 questions in the Q&A that we haven't answered. Should we look at those? And then please, colleagues, if you have other questions, do add. Nicholas asks, I'm interested in politics of knowledge production and mobilization. Curious if a panelist could speak to the politics or process of becoming an editor-in-chief. Often we see a succession of an AA to editor-in-chief role, but others are brought in without much previous association. So that's a really good question. And actually, it depends on the journal. It really depends on the journal and the culture of the journal. Usually, if you are an editor-in-chief, from my experience, like, you have to have some significant experience. From my point of view, it's always great to have someone who's been an associate editor in the journal, because they get the journal, or like someone who used to be an editor in the journal. But I don't know if colleagues have other comments on this.
I think I just want to say that, politics is life, and you're going to see it in every aspect of life, such as academia, such as editors. And maybe, some of the scope of this question is beyond the present panel, but, it's something to think about. Yeah.
Absolutely. And I think, we mentioned before that, some journals tend to want to be very inclusive. So maybe have like a joint co-editorship with people who represent different groups that are, kind of stakeholders, so to speak, in the journal, from different backgrounds with different types of, lived experience, expertise, and so on. So I think it really depends on the journal. And, as we said, politics is often part of it. Sorry, Kristin, go for it.
Just very briefly, because I think it's important. So Ilaria and I took on this co-editorship together, and we've been doing it for a year. And I have to say that a lot of it has to do with how well we work together. And we've got, strong communication, aligned sort of interests, and we're working across an ocean, and it doesn't seem to feel that way. And that's been really important. So we need to talk about the fact that a lot of this work happens in different geographies, but relationships and the ability to work together are pretty critical to how successful the journal will be. And I know that I couldn't do this job without Ilaria. And I think that our skills really work well together. So if you're looking for a team to join, you need to consider that as part of it.
Absolutely. And how, equitably the work is distributed, and, the different strengths people have as well. I think that's really important. The next question is, I'm an early career academic and was warned by well-intentioned colleagues to stay far away from becoming an associate editor until tenure and promotion. I'm curious hearing your own thoughts or advice to early career academics becoming involved in editing. Is it really that risky to take on? So I would venture and say that you are kind of like on the American side or Canadian side, because I think from a UK perspective, it's actually a good thing and it looks good on your promotion application. So maybe I'll leave it with colleagues from that side of the world to answer this.
Well, I know Nick, and he is very capable of being an associate editor, and he is got some tremendous publications. So don't listen to your well-intentioned colleagues, Nick. Go find an AE gig and give back to the community, because you're very talented.
Yeah, I would add to that. I don't think it's risky. I think one of the things I learned late in my academic career, I just got promoted to professor, I guess last July, and it's funny because I feel like I'm just starting to be an academic now, and I'm thinking, like, we have a good life. You can do whatever you want in this job. Like, I love writing, I love ideas, I love reading. So as long as you love doing what you're doing, I mean, you can craft your academic life in the way you want. If you excel at writing, you excel at reviewing, do that. If you like doing service work at your institution, do that. But we're always kind of composing our lives as academics. So I think you should do whatever you want. This is this is what I learned last year. I'm like, I can do whatever I want. This is great. I can write a book. I can do this. So that was really empowering. It only happened, 15 years in my career, but I'm a late bloomer.
Yes, and I would say the only caveat would be if you don't have enough experience of publishing and reviewing and so on, but it sounds like that's not your case, Nick. Our last question. Hello. I always want to ask an associate editor such as yourselves whose work chimes with your own, but I'm not sure how this is received. I tried it once, but we didn't get the editors we had flagged. We received a different editor whose reviewers were pretty hostile to our theorization. Should we ask for an editor? Can it create a different set of problems? So very good question. Again, it kind of depends on the journal. So some journals allow you to suggest editors or even reviewers, or suggest people that you don't want as editors and reviewers. I have had a very similar experience where, you know, I had a very critical, kind of like written differently paper, and it went to a very mainstream editor who didn't get the paper, chose the wrong reviewers, and in the end we actually pulled the paper because it's like we're talking to different languages there. But I think, you know, I would try, you know, if the journal allows it in the cover letter, I would definitely say, you know, amongst the pool of your editors, some who might be, you know, kind of like particularly suitable for this type of scholarship, blah, 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 or, you know, since our work builds on or is connected to the work of blah, blah, associate editor, that might be a particularly good fit. So I think it doesn't hurt to ask, and then, you know, it might be that the, you know, the editors don't follow that, or maybe the editors already have too many papers assigned to them, so they cannot take it on. But I think it's worth asking.
I have done that and been successful with that strategy. I know it takes a little bit of courage, but I absolutely endorse it.
Thank you all. I think this is the end of our questions and our time.
Is it back over to me then, Ilaria?
Thank you.
Great. Sarah, if you could just put up the closing slide, please, that would be great. So thank you very much, first of all, to our panelists, lovely panelists, and for this really insightful and interesting discussion. I think, you know, there's so much to learn there, and also so much to think about, because we tend to think of the publishing system as something that squashes us a lot of the time, you know, something that imposes of us. But actually, publishing is what we collectively make it. You know, we can't really blame it too much on other people, because we are the authors, we are the reviewers, we are the editors. So I think you've just given a lot of collective hope to the participants, myself included, that the future of journal publishing is in great hands. And it's great that, you know, we've had participants from all over the world here today who are interested in contributing to the community. So thanks very much again, Ilaria and Gabrielle and Kristin and Suhaib, for this fantastic discussion. And thank you to our participants for attending. We hope you enjoyed it as much as I have, I guess. Yes, and thank you very much for also to the team Messentech team behind the scenes, in particular Sarah Person, our Zoom pilot today, who's piloted everything really smoothly, and for the wider support team that is supporting in the background. These are some of the next two forthcoming events for CMS and Tech, so I hope to see you there. Next up is a management learning special issue call on unlearning from the margin. It's promising to be absolutely fascinating. If you have a phone, you might the QR code will take you straight to registration if you point your camera at it. And then that's on the 2nd of February, and then on the 7th of February, following quite closely, is our next Hot of the Press event on critical thinking in human resource development, another really interesting event coming up. So, and again, QR code for you there. So I hope to see you at these events, and do get involved with CMS and Tech as well. We're a community organization, basically. We always welcome involvement. If you have ideas for running your own event, if you want to join the CMS and Tech team, or if you just want to follow what we do, we're on YouTube, on Twitter, and you can contact us by email as well. So please do get in touch with CMS and Tech. And for now, thank you all very much. Take care, stay safe, and see you all soon. Bye for now.
Thank you. Bye.